Rites of Passage. National Conference of the Black Child. Rites of Passage. National Conference of the Black Child.
I was being influenced by social forces that they couldn't even touch, couldn't even understand.
You getting your information from what you watch on the news.
Yeah, that's
you
what
getting information what they're feeding you.
I was being influenced by social forces that they couldn't even touch, couldn't even understand.
You getting your information from what you watch on the news.
Yeah, that's
you
what
getting information what they're feeding you. And when you're in control of the media.
On your program, there's a wonderful artistic rendition of logos from ancient Kemet. You will see there's a grand vulture with wings holding a circle underneath, which is the circle of eternity, representing sometimes a symbol for gold, but most often eternity. I would like for you to stretch your hands and make the circle of eternity. And now we begin the libation of the morning. For it is that we will pour libation. And the meaning of pouring libation is that we call forth the presence of God Almighty. When we call forth the presence of God Almighty, we know that we can become anointed. And so the taking of the water and pouring it from a vessel represents the outpouring of God onto us. And we know that in the Bible there was a case when David poured water for libation unto God. The men came to worship David, and he said, "Do not worship me," but he took the water and poured the water out as an example that we should not worship each other necessarily, but that we should worship God supreme. And yet at the same time, we do honor and give homage to each other when we have the presence of God in us. And so therefore, we come together, whether you be Islamic, whether you be Christian, whether you be of Rastafarian, whether you be Hindu, whatever you may be, we all believe and understand, for our people have said, never said there is not a God, for God does exist, and God is supreme. And if you were in South Africa, they would call God supreme Olonkolo. If you were in Kenya amongst the Kikuyu, they would say Mulungu. If you were amongst the Yoruba, they would say God was Oluwa. If you were amongst the Igbos, they would say Chineke. If you were amongst the people of Ghana, they would say Nyame, Ji Nyame. If you were amongst the people of ancient Kemet, they would say Ra. If you were amongst those of Dogon, they would say God Amma. And so the meaning, whatever it is, it gets to be the meaning of the eternal, the everlasting, the almighty, God supreme. And so let me pour water to our God. Let us pour water, libation, in memory of the first human beings that God created. Her name was not Lucy. It must have been Mama Sapphire. We pour water to those who were created in perfection. And although some of them fell, we found that God continued to strive and to work with us. We pour water to those great empires along the Nile. Ashe. When I pour and raise my hand, I would like for you to respond by saying Ashe, which represents the spiritual energy of the Yoruba. Or if you choose, you may say Hotep, which represents peace amongst the people in Kemet. Or you may say Amen in reference to Amenhotep, or let it be, which many people say in the churches. Or if you would like, you may say Yao, because Yao is the Ghanaian representation of let it be. Let us all say Ashe. Ashe. Let us all say Hotep. Hotep. Let us all say Amen. Amen. are doing. And so our ancestors came and built civilizations along the Nile. They built civilizations along the Niger. And we had the great empires of Mali, Songhai. We had great empires of the Islamic world that built Timbuktu and the University of Sankore, where you had eye surgery being performed. We had the greatest of our scientists of the Moors bringing science and industry and culture and universities into Europe, into Spain, where the Moorish empires thrived. We had civilizations and cultures down in Zimbabwe. The ruins of Zimbabwe attest to the great architectural skills and the trade that occurred during this particular time and age. And we had civilizations of Africa transporting in our Holocaust the horrible conditions, taking and raping our people out of Africa, and they went out into the diaspora. And so people went into the Brazil, and where you had empires of our people suppressed and coming out nevertheless to fight against the atrocities of slavery that was in Brazil and in the Caribbean. And so we built these communities of rebelliousness against white supremacy. And these communities, we had giants of the Palenques, of the Cumbes, of the Maroons. We poured to those who have carried us into this liberation struggle during that period. And we are reminded too that in the progress of time and eternity, that we have also had great leaders that have come to fight for the struggle, those that were our Frederick Douglasses, those that our Harriet Tubmans, our Sojourner Truths in the Americas, and we pour to them. And we pour to our genetic memory and to the learning and the fortitude that we learned from the great heroes like Aimé Césaire in the Caribbean, and to the great Boukman and Toussaint Louverture in Haiti. Amen. And we pour to those great leaders that struggle in Great Britain and throughout Europe so that we might not be caught up and continued in the slave trade. Amen. And we pour to great scholars like Marcus Garvey with the UNITA movement. And we pour to Marcus Garvey. And we pour continually up to the Malcolm X's and to the Martin Luther King and the liberation of us all. Amen. And we pour continually today to those of you, call your own name if you are engaged in the struggle. If you are not, then keep silent. May we all make the sign of eternity and continue the conference. Thank you, God, for being with us this day. Amen. Amen. Okay.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll be very, very brief in terms of my introduction. Dr. Molefi Asante, sitting over here on my right, is professor and chair of the Department of African American Studies at the University of Philadelphia. Some of you may be familiar with him through his writings. I have a few of his books here. Afrocentricity, Kemet, Afrocentricity and Knowledge, Classical Africa, which I think is your newest work, and African Culture, okay? He's written over 30 books and had over 250 articles published. He was born in Georgia and has worked in Zimbabwe training journalists. Dr. Asante received his PhD at age 26 years, so you can imagine how I feel sitting on the platform next to this person here. He achieved his professorship at the age of 30. A prolific speaker and educator, he He is the creator of the first doctoral program in African American studies in the world. I give you Dr. Asante.
Hotep, I stand here at the National Conference reminded of the fact that you have had this conference now for several years, and you have had incredible presenters. You've had a dynamic movement here in the UK. At this conference, I am honored to be on the program with some of the most highly acclaimed people I know. Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, Dr. Pat Newton, Tony Browder, and also to have in the audience Atlantis Browder, who wrote her first book when she was, I think, 12 or something. Stand up, Atlantis, let them see you. She's a writer. She's written a book already. I mean, she wrote a book on Egypt. So it is an absolute published book. I was very impressed when I first saw her book. I told my son, I said, see, you got little people out there writing, at this age. It's really wonderful. And it shows you what great things African people can do and indeed have done. When Paula Bono was trying to get me to come to this conference, we tried all kinds of things, and we finally arranged it. And if I fall asleep while I'm talking up here, I just got in this morning, and it is now 4:30 for me in the morning. So I hope not to fall asleep. But I also know that being here at this conference with Pat Newton, I'll probably stay awake. You may have seen the Time magazine for this past week. The Time magazine, among other people, it attacks Pat Newton. And I said to Pat, I said, coming to this conference and being on the same program with you, I know by the time I land in New York, they're going to be associating me with you and associating me with your dynamic presentations and your exposure of white supremacy in the world. So when I saw my topic, which was the role of media in the Eurocentric world, I knew right away that I'm going to get into trouble. I said, right away, this is a troublesome topic. By way of introduction, let me start out by saying that when I look at this topic, I have to have the support of all of my ancestors. And I feel very comfortable with my ancestors. I feel comfortable with the critiques that have been made by people like Walter Rodney, how Europe underdeveloped Africa. I am comfortable with Frantz Fanon and his analysis of what happens during neocolonialism and also what happens when black people try to be white people. I am comfortable with the work of Marimba Ani, the great work that she has just completed, Urugu, an Africa-centered critique of European behavior and thought, a thought and behavior, which is certainly going to become a classic. I'm comfortable with all of the ancestors mentioned in the libation, with Boukman, with Yanga, with Zumbi, with Garvey. I'm comfortable with Marley, those who have made our culture known throughout the world. And so they are the supports that I have this morning when this afternoon when I am, I'm sorry, this morning, I don't know what time it is, but I'm sure, this is still morning, right? Yeah. This morning, when I am trying to examine this topic, I want to start by saying that there are three fundamental areas that ought to be covered when you look at the role of media in the Eurocentric world. The first one is the propagation of the hierarchy of races, with the Aryans and the Nordics at the top. The second one is the imposition of European ideas and concepts on the rest of the world as if they are universal. And the third one is the writing of a text that supports the material and economic interests of white supremacy. It seems to me that these three areas are the fundamental areas for the role of the Eurocentric media. The propagation of the hierarchy of races, with the Aryans and the Nordics at the top. This is a process that goes back hundreds of years, but perhaps gained its steam in the 18th century when the von Humboldts of Germany at Göttingen, University of Göttingen, decided that they would create this notion of racial hierarchies, with the Aryans at the top, the Alpines next, the Mediterraneans next, and the Africans and the Asians somewhere down below. This notion, created at the University of Göttingen, was attached to the idea that antiquity for the Aryans was antiquity that went back to the Greeks. In other words, they couldn't find any antiquity among the Aryans that amounted to anything, so what they did was to leap over the contemporary Mediterraneans, the Greeks, and go back to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle and say that these were the direct ancestors of the Aryans, and this was the connection that was created in the 18th century. In addition to this, Campier in the Netherlands said that if you look at the Greek statues would give you the most perfect example of human form. However, he said, if you look at the African would give you the lowest form of humankind. So this development in Campier's thinking, as in the thinking of the von Humboldts in Germany, was the very basis, laying the basis for the propagation of the hierarchy of races, with the Aryans and the Nordics at the top. In fact, if you go to Germany, Hegel in 1828 writes, "Let us forget Africa, never to return to it, because Africa is outside of history." Cuvier in France wrote 16 volumes called The Animal Kingdom. And in these 16 volumes, he attempted to universalize the notion of racial difference. And he said, in one of the volumes, he says, blacks are like monkeys, but Europeans are almost perfect. They are the most beautiful human beings, and they are right to exercise domination over others. But don't forget the UK, because Thomas Carlyle, among other things, wrote not just about the French Revolution, but he also wrote a pamphlet called On the Nigger Question. So whether you take the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, or whether you take the United States of America, the whole idea behind the propagation of ideas, whether through the newspaper or books or electronic media. The idea has been the propagation of the hierarchy of races, with the Aryans and the Nordics at the top. The second issue, the imposition of European concepts on the rest of the world as if those concepts are universal, is a very clear development in that regard. For example, if you look at Thomas Macaulay, who was a Britisher and was involved, of course, in the colonial business, he said that Britain needed to develop in India. He was writing about India at the time, but it could apply to Africa or to any country in Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, or Ghana. He says Britain needed a class of persons who would be Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. We got some of them in the United States. Got a guy named Dinesh D'Souza, who we debate all the time, who's confused, dislocated. And y'all may not have any here in the UK who's confused, but we got a lot of them who are out of place, dislocated in their mind. In fact, we got some Africans like that. Now, I know y'all got some Africans like that because Paul Gilroy has been in the United States, and we had to challenge him over there. So we know y'all got some Africans like that, but you probably got some Indians like that too. Dislocated. I mean, individuals whose minds have in fact been stolen from them, or they have given them up on their own accord, but who are simply out of their minds. But I'm telling you, this was a plan. It was planned to happen that way. This is why the colonial officers knew what they were doing. It was designed. The role of all the media was the same. How can we make these Africans think and act in our own interest, in the interest of white people? That's what they do all the time. How do you create Africans who act in the interest of other people? How do you create Indians who act in the interest of other people? That is, against their own interest. I mean, we call it the process, we call it in the United States, we call it Clarencization. And we call it Clarencization because we have a guy named Clarence Thomas who's on the Supreme Court. But he obviously went through the process of Clarencization, because what happens is that's the process of taking you out of your own mind. And it's a very simple process. All you have to do, it's a simple process. You find an African who has thoughts of his own, and you simply remove those thoughts. You change everything. First of all, you tell him, you ain't no African. You're not an African. Don't let people tell you you're African. You're not an African. I don't even think of you as an African. You don't even look like an African. You can't even dance like an African. You know what I'm saying? They tell you all kinds of things, and then you believe it. So that's a process already. It's happening. And the process has gone on for several hundred years. Person get off the plane, get off the boat in the UK, immediately get off the boat. So you know, Shakespeare was the greatest writer who ever lived. Hasn't even looked into any African writers, doesn't know anything about African literature, hasn't even considered Pushkin, who in my judgment was the greatest writer who ever lived. But that's a whole other thing. We just don't know. What happens to us is that our minds are stolen and are taken away from us. This is the Clarencization process. I'm going to get to that in a little bit more detail in a minute because I want to just test you out. I want to see what we have. Where are we in the UK? Where are we in Manchester and London and Liverpool and Bristol? I want to know where your minds are on this question. Look at this. This imposition of European ideas was so well ingrained in the thought of people in Britain that William Warburton, a bishop in 1730, wrote a book called The Divine Legation of Moses. And he said in this book, he said, now, to show you what he believed about Africa, he said, Pythagoras spent 21 years in Africa. He admits it. A lot of people don't want to admit that Pythagoras ever went to Egypt, never studied in Africa. Of course, we know he studied there. But this guy says, look, Pythagoras spent 21 years in Africa, but he didn't learn a thing. Now, I didn't say he was dumb. Warburton said he was dumb. Warburton says he didn't learn a thing. The guy had a scholarship to study in Egypt. He was there studying in Egypt. But Warburton writes he didn't learn. He said it was not possible because the Africans could not think abstractly. And they had no concepts that they could apply or give to Pythagoras, who was a Greek, that will allow him to develop his theorem that he didn't learn from them. It's strange, but that's the attitude that is a part of this dissemination of information. I'm going to get, see, we get to this media bit, the media creates audiences. Sometimes we think that, there's a neutral audience out there, but audiences are created. Information sorts out, prioritizes. And then the media can simply narrow in and focus in on giving you a specific message. Take the third piece. I said that the role of the media in the Eurocentric world was to write a text that supports the material and economic interests of white supremacy. The economic interests are supported by, I think, two basic myths. One myth is that media is a great leveler of people. That, in fact, the more media you have, the more equal people will be. It's a great leveler, that we all see the same programs, we all read the same newspapers, the same magazines. We all influence the same way, so we're all equal. And we all level. There's a leveling that goes on because of the media. That's a great myth. And it remains a myth. It's a myth. But if you can get people to believe in the myth, to buy into that myth, then you can also control their behavior. And a lot of people have bought into that myth. There's a second one. I'll come back to that one. There's a second myth, that media produces wealth for everyone. In fact, the more you have media involved in your community, in your life, in your country, it spreads things around. It equalizes. But I'm here to tell you that that's not true. We are, number one, we are not smarter because of media. If you ask me, we might be more ignorant because of it. I was talking to some people in the States the other day, and I'm sure if I asked people here, they probably could tell me too. Or couldn't tell me, whatever. Same difference because we're not smarter. We just don't know, right? I was asking a guy, I said, What about the conflict going on in Rwanda and Burundi? Now, I asked them that. Then I said, okay, before you answer, tell me about what's going on with the Palestinians and the Israelis. I said, before you answer, tell me about the Kurds and the Turks. You know which one he knew about? You can answer. Which one? I mean, y'all don't talk back here. See, in the States, we talk back. Well, I mean, I know this is a British reserve, but it's all right. But it's all right. But let me just go. But he knew about the Israeli and the Palestinians. I told him, I said 1 million people have been killed in 7 months in Rwanda. You know why you haven't heard about it? Because the media knows what it's doing. Why get you all emotional about black people being killed in Africa? The reason you know about Inkatha and the Zulu is because white folk are down there. See, you have to, what did I say? I said it was writing a text that supports the material and economic interests of white supremacy. And until you understand that, you will not understand the role of the media in the Eurocentric world. Eurocentrism is the imposition of a particularism as if it is universal. What is in the interest of white supremacy in the mind of those who run this industry is in the interest of the world. Consequently, we are more dislocated if we buy into it. If an African buys into the Eurocentric model for the media, then what happens is that African person becomes an anti-African African. Because you cannot go to school in the UK and go to college in the UK or the United States and come out of that experience untouched unless there has been in your life an intervention such as this. If there has not been, you find the brother or the sister who hasn't had an Afrocentric intervention, and what you will discover is that if they have bought all of the images that have been disseminated to them through the media, they have become often just like the folk to whom those images were directed in the first place. It's a natural thing. Look at it. The whole educational system in UK was not built for black people. They didn't build these universities and colleges for Africans. That wasn't the intention. The curriculum was not designed to educate African people. They didn't build schools in England to educate black children. That wasn't the process. These schools were designed. The curricula were set up. The scope and sequences and lesson plans were organized to make better white children. Black children just happen to go to those schools. And when they come out, they are better white children too. No, if you ask an African child in this country to identify just the names of 5 African ethnic groups, you can ask them. Doesn't matter what grade level they're in. Just give me 5 African ethnic groups. Tell them a little bit of something about them. You'd be shocked. But then you could ask them, name me 5 European ethnic groups and see what they know. They probably know 25. I did this experiment at Harvard. This to the black law students. I spoke to the African American law students. Been to the best prep schools in the country. I said, name 5 African ethnic groups. They couldn't name one. One guy did volunteer. I'm sorry. Because I asked them in a more narrowly focused way. I said, name 5 African ethnic groups that were brought to the Americas during the slave trade. And one guy said Zulu. I said, the Zulu are from the Indian Ocean side. In southern Africa, you know, they probably no Zulu ever got here. But he had heard that on the media. You know the Zulu on the media. You know, everybody know the Zulu. They're the only African ethnic group on the continent. You know, there's nobody. I mean, you know, you ask somebody, who are the other ethnic groups in South Africa? You know, who are the other? I mean, you know the Zulu, but Mandela's not Zulu. So the question becomes now, who are all these other folk? But what I'm saying, if the school system was designed in such a way that it also educated all the children, not just the white children, but all the children in the system, you would have that information. Students would know that information. If you ask people, for example, identify civilizations in antiquity, most likely, if you say, identify civilizations in antiquity, most likely they would identify for you European civilization, Greeks and Rome. You say, well, what about Kemet? What about Nubia? What about Aksum? What about Ghana? Rises 300 BC. You know, what about ancient African civilization? And that is because the way the curriculum has been constructed is such that African children are educated away from themselves, not reinforced in an understanding of the world from themselves as subjects of human history. So the dislocation is such that we don't know more because of media, but we are more materialistic. We want to acquire more things. So what is this? It is then obviously an entire system designed to create more consumers. And consumers who will purchase and buy more goods to keep fewer people in economic wealth and power. That's the market. That's the marketplace, and that is the structure of the system. This is why I say the media doesn't produce wealth for everyone. In fact, and we rarely have, if you even look at the so-called multinational corporations, they really are not multinational corporations. Most of them are not multinational corporations. People say multinational. They're really national corporations that operate in many places. You know what I'm saying? They really are. If they are from the United States of America, they're American organizations. They just happen to be in many different nations. But the people who run it are from many different nations. And the same is true all over the world. So you got these so-called multinationals, but they are only multinationals in the creation of consumers, not in the operation and the management of the organization. And the next point that I want to make on this is this, that if they are writing through the media a text that supports the material and economic interests of whites, supremacy, then what must we do? It seems to me that we must write a different text. We must write a different script. And when I say we need to write a different text, the reason I'm saying that is because if you are not careful here, soon there will be, media will be telling you who the black leaders are. They would say, oh, you know, such and such a person is the leader of the African community here in Britain. Or such and such a person is the outstanding. They will be writing big articles on these people, and you will be saying, who are these guys? You'll be saying, well, you know, I've never seen these persons at the national conference. I mean, I don't see them in our, you know, they don't come to the bookstores. They don't buy, I mean, who are these people? What you discover is that in order to keep a position of control, it is necessary in order for white supremacy to function for it to have surrogates. You got to have surrogates. Otherwise, you don't know what's going to happen. You know, you got to have someone, and the best ones are the ones who tell you, you know, I don't have nothing to do with this African business. I don't know what they're doing. You know, and then say, well, you're a good one. You go out there then, go out front, and every time you get a chance, you get up and you tell them. They don't know what they're doing. They ain't no Africans. Excuse the vernacular. That's Georgia in the South, U.S. But they ain't no Africans, right? But there's a beautiful proverb that comes from the Wolof people of Senegal, which says, wood may remain in water for 10 years, but it will never become a crocodile. Now, I know, you know, wood, a lot of things happen to it. You know, it will change its color, even the consistency and everything, but it will never become a crocodile. And some of you may believe that you have been here 3 generations, so you ain't no African anymore. I call it saltwater transformation, the saline consciousness. You know, cross the water, you got in the UK, you change. Now, Chinese can come over here tomorrow and still be a Chinese 100 years from now. Doesn't change Chinese. Only Africans are affected by this disease. It's the only disease that just affects African people. You know, everybody else can come and be here for generations and say, I'm Greek. I'm still Greek. You know, person can come from any other place in the world. Say, I'm India. I'm still India. I'm Indian. But Africans, say, I'm no African. No. That's because the media has also done a job on the image of Africa. So we hate Africa. We despise it. Don't even want to be associated with it because they have told you Africa is bad. Because if it were good, you'd be the first one to say, hey, you know, I'm African. I have no problem with it. But it's because in your mind, the media has made Africa negative. And negative images create in the person this desire for distance. But what we need, what we truly need, is a critical theory of the media. And a critical theory that begins with an Afrocentric orientation. And Afrocentricity is very simple. It is the quality of viewing yourself as an agent in human history. You are central. You are a subject of human history. You're not marginal, and you're not on the periphery. You're not a fringe person, and you don't get your definitions by white people. You create out of your own agency. That's Afrocentric. See, you can't look at the history of Central Africa through the eyes of David Livingstone and think you got something. And I know a lot of y'all do that. David Livingstone, lost in the forest, being led by Africans, goes to Musiwatunya, the most fantastic waterfalls you have ever seen, looks at this waterfalls and says, this is the most beautiful sight I have ever seen. It must be the place from whence the angels left to go to heaven. That's what he said. I went there and saw what he wrote. I'm going to name this after the Queen, Victoria Falls. Isn't that arrogant? That's real bold. You know, I tried that the last time I was in Manchester. Indian brother from Manchester Polytechnic picked me up. I got off the plane at the airport, got off, first time in Manchester. I said, I'm in Manchester now, I'm gonna name this New Lagos. And the guy looked at me like I was crazy, right? You know, you know what? But all over Africa, that's what the Europeans did. Salisbury. So it had to revert back to its original name, Harare. Leopoldville, Elizabethville, Stanleyville. You know, all these things. They're going to change Joburg too. It's going to be changed. Watch and see. Oh, Pretoria, they're going to change it. It's going to be changed. Just wait. It is necessary. See, because what the Europeans did, their notion was, let's impose ourselves. Let's take all the space. Leave nothing for anybody else. And that's why I always say, that's what they did with the term, when you say classical music, they don't have any space for anybody else's classical music. You know, there's no Akan classical or Yoruba classical or Indian classical or Japanese classical. When you say classical music, right, what thing comes to your mind is European concert music. First thing. They're the only classical music, see? Because it took all the space. What we've got to do is to begin the process of critically analyzing everything. Don't let anything pass. I don't let anything pass. I wake up in the morning and I think, what did I miss something? If I did, let me go get it. We got a big, this is just sort of an aside, we got a big controversy on my campus right now that I created. I created because the dean, who is the head of a college in my university, decided she's going to create a department of modern languages with French, Italian, German, and Spanish. I told her you ain't going to do it. You didn't mention one African or one Asian language. You're not going to have a Department of Modern Languages here. And I can say that in Philadelphia, you see. Y'all can't say that in Pancho. But in Philadelphia, we can say that, you see. My university is right in the heart of a 99% African-American community. We can say that. You're not going to have a Department of Modern Language. You're going to have a Department of Modern Languages and not one African language in such a department? Come on, what kind of conception is that? You can't impose that on people. That's a construction that comes out of the notion of white supremacy. And it comes out not just in that, come every day, everything. So you got to critically analyze everything. Don't take anything. H. Rap Brown, you may not have heard of H. Rap Brown in the 1960s. He's one of our student leaders. H. Rap Brown said, if they say it's light outside, you say it's dark. If they said talk low, talk loud. You got to question everything. All he's saying, you got to question everything. You don't know because the purpose is wrong. The aim is wrong. The aim is not for humanity. It's not for bringing human beings together. It's not for pluralism without hierarchy. It is for white supremacy, and that's wrong. And any kind of racism is wrong. We've got to deal with that. We need an Afrocentric agency-based idea of emancipation. And we got to challenge the media. Our education should consist of understanding the uses of media in a number of ways. One, predictive rationality. That is, how media uses techniques and technology to control the whole process of controlling human ideas and human beings. We've got to understand how it uses interpretative rationality, meaning, giving meaning to different things and different ideas. We have a big discussion going on in the States now over the question of a book that was written called The Secret Relationship of Blacks and the Jews. Big controversy going on. Most people who are engaged in the controversy haven't read the book. But it's about interpretation, it's about meaning. It's about it's not even about what's in the book. The question now is who controls the meaning? Who controls the instrument? It's not about the factual information or anything. It's beyond that. Because the idea of control is how do you interpret meaning? Most of the citations and references in the book are from Jewish sources. But they don't control the book. They controlled the journals that they had those articles in that they wrote very freely about. But now, since they don't control the book, then there's a problem. The problem is the question of meaning and interpretation. That's a big issue. We've got to understand that. We've got to understand how simple concepts and ideas taken by the media can create false impressions. I mean, there's a lot to talk about on that. I mean, particularly in terms of what has happened in the U.S. Reproductive rationality, particularly in terms of how power is distributed, and sometimes distributed unjustly in an unequal way. You have things reproduced, but nevertheless, the power relationships remain essentially the same unless you confront them in a transforming way. And this is true whether you're talking, I always like to say that all of the ideologies of oppression, classism, sexism, all the ideologies of oppression have to be confronted. Racism, they've got to be confronted head on. And this is why the Afrocentrists have argued that all of the issues of oppression really, there's a confluence of them. They come together to keep people down. You've got to challenge each one of them. All of them have to be raised. All of this is about control. We call it the plantation system. You can get off the plantation system, but you've got to transform the way you think in order to get off. Because sometimes, in the plantation system in the U.S. South, what would happen, some guy would get an idea, some woman would get an idea that, we should get off this plantation. We should run away. We should escape. We should get out of here. And as soon as they got ready to escape, some other African would come up and say, why are you going to run away? This is a good place. Where are we going to find a plantation better than this plantation? We have a good master here. Where are you going? You see what I'm saying? So what happens is that sometimes when you start talking about being an agent, it's scary for people. They don't want to walk out there on their own and trust their own intelligence. Because if you've been a slave so long and you've been linked so long to the master in your head, you can't think of delinking because it's dangerous. I mean, you got to go fend for yourself. You're accountable now. You can't be a beggar people and go into the 21st century. No people who will not view themselves as agents can even think of surviving in the 21st century. It's about electronic highways. It's about a passion for knowledge and new technologies. It's about emancipation and liberation. Not just physical, but mental liberation and emancipation. It's also about African people coming back on the stage of life and taking their correct position to help to humanize the world. That's a mission of Africa. It's always been the mission of Africa, historically, to humanize the world. What did King Ansa say when the Portuguese came in 1482? We greet you with open arms. We bear no weapons. Come and eat with us. And what did the Europeans do? Sure they did. But that's the African. That's always the African's desire. In the great family of nations and of the world. So let us use our understanding. Let us have a different view of media. Let us use it to liberate humans from racism, from classism and sexism, and any other oppressive ideology. We have a continuity of generations. We have a common memory of events. We have a common history and a common destiny. And so I say to you, let us rise up to educate our children in the UK and everywhere to be truly free. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope that you will join with me in thanking our speaker, Dr. Asante, for what has been a wonderful start to the program. Okay, we'll be back here at 1:30.
National Conference of the Black Child. That's a passage.
in Africa. Why can't we buy one? That's why United States Information Service does. So what happened to your money? What happened to your earnings? Where do you spend your money? Some of the supermarkets here use the money to fund the National Front. And I'm telling you, when you go to Safeways or Sainsbury or some other saint I don't know, you find a whole heap of Africans. Someone was telling me yesterday, I'll say this and then conclude my remark, that he went to a place in London, in Tottenham. No, it's somehow, maybe it doesn't like what I'm saying, but I tell you anyway. He went to a place in Tottenham where there is a shop that sells fish that is owned by white people, and another shop that sells fish that is owned by African brothers. These brothers are so African, they have African hair, big African nose so that they can have enough fresh air, they have big African feet, they have everything African. But there was a huge queue on the white store, and a smaller, almost insignificant queue on a black store. I went to Brixton, and I'm telling you, I never go to Brixton again. Every supermarket that you find there are millions of Africans. There are so many that I couldn't even count them. But every store that you find that is owned by the Chinese, that is owned by the English, and all the other Nordic and whatever, there will be thousands of African people there. These African people will never deliver liberation to us. That's not how the liberation is delivered. Liberation is delivered by getting on your feet and getting your arms and your big African frame and taking it down out there in the continent and doing something for it.
How many of you have kids? Well, where's the answer?
Nothing's changed with cartoons.
If you have kids, the kids probably watch cartoons. How many of you have kids that watch cartoons? How many of you satisfied with what they watch with the cartoons? You're not satisfied? All of those hands? All right, now, all of the people that's not satisfied should come to the mic and tell us why you're not satisfied with what you see them watching.
Yeah, I've got, sorry, just say it. I think that cartoons from like a lot of people in this room, when we were younger, cartoons have changed. So we used to like watch Bugs Bunny and Walt Disney things and that. But now, the great influence on cartoons is satellite TV, and there's the children's channel, there's Nickelodeon, there's this and that, which really is a lot of imported stuff from the States. There's nothing what they can relate to themselves, and I think the length of time that children spend watching satellite TV and things, it just does them no good whatsoever. So
it does them no good.
I can't see that it's got an educational value to it at all, apart from...
Well, you know, everything doesn't have to have total educational value that kids do, you know. But sometimes if they're in school all day long, sometimes they want to be entertained. If it's not absolute damage, you know, some damage that's being done, I mean, you just... And yet if they're having fun, you want to probably program it, or I should ask you, is that the case, you know, so that everything doesn't have to be educational television, but entertainment, but you don't want it to damage.
No, I think, yeah, I mean, I can't respond to it. But, yeah, there's not all of it's educational. Some of it is, but at the end of the day, you've got to monitor and make sure that children don't have too much of it.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm from Liverpool.
I'm a secret cartoon watcher. I sit with my daughter and watch the cartoons.
I think many of us are. Sometimes you can laugh and it can just take your mind off some serious things.
But some of the cartoons, like, I'm very disturbed by them because, like, you'll see Roadrunner, which is I don't know what it is. It's some kind of whatever. It runs around a lot. It does all sorts of things like throwing rocks from the top and trying to catch this bird, the coyote or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And it's a lot of violence, and it's a lot of things, like, if you look at it in reality, the children are looking at things that, like, in reality you wouldn't do. Now, what disturbed me years ago was people in cartoons, people are jumping off high-rise buildings and splattered on the floor, but they're still getting up. And in Liverpool, there was a boy that saw that and jumped at the top, and ended up really paralyzed, So things like that, it's disturbing. And my daughter, she's very intelligent now. She gets fed up with some of the cartoons. She can see that some of them are so stupid. She just watches what she wants to watch. But, like, as a mother, I do monitor things because of them things. And there's too much of that. That's all I wanted to say, really.
Anybody else feel the same way about the cartoons? What is the message that they're trying to, most cartoons have this message that they try to show all of this bad things happen to bad, whether it's something running after something, damage something, hit over the head and continue to keep going, a big knot, etc. It disappears and, you kill them and they get up and go. That's the essence of cartoons, isn't it? Slapstick, yes, slapstick comedy. Is that dangerous or not? But then that means that you can't, where's the artistic license? We grew up with it though, didn't we? Did it damage us? Somebody said, of course it did.
Mm-hmm. If I sit and watching the TV, I analyze and say that is rubbish. That's not real. Nothing go like that. And one of the things you have
The mic.
You want to not Bugs Bunny, these Tom and Jerry. Tom and Jerry, you never see a black woman, but you always see some rocky black woman foot. And if you never see our faces, and sheer racism, right? So people who say just sit here and pretend that the cartoon doesn't have a effect on European media, doesn't have a effect on us, we'll tell ourselves a lie. It does have a effect on all of us. And we have to say it does. You see everybody remain quiet in the room. It means that we know what's happening. And we feel that right as when you speak up. You see, I go to cut-up conferences, and I don't like to hope for big mouth because I don't want to
Go ahead.
start rocking the boat and then people start getting upset because I just tell people in the street. Stop sitting there and telling lies to yourself. You know what white people are doing to you. You know what the Asian man, you know what the Arabs are doing to you. Why are you going to do about it? Right? So, all the media thing that we hear about, some of us, you have black women and black men are running to watch neighbors and over and lower and you hear it. Everybody's Carnation Street. They can tell you the character, they can tell you
There's just one quick interruption, please. Could parents collect their children from the creche at 5:30? Those things that were said are very, very important, and we should do something about it. Some people don't want to talk because sometimes they don't know what to do. But do you have Media Watch? And we have what's called Samotap. You don't? You don't have Media Watch here? Well, you need a Media Watch. Media Watch is a group of parents or citizens or any group that will decide to get together. You can have several or many. And when each person is given a particular day or particular hour or time to watch, and that's all you do is you watch during your time, and if you see anything offensive, you come back and you all report until you end up getting the right information out, and then you send letters to those TV stations, those radio stations, and telling them what is offensive for your people about what was shown. They very often will look to letters and consider one letter as if that was 100. And so that you need to have groups where you're letting them know what it is. I remember looking back at a Popeye, and I grew up on Popeye and liked Popeye, and I re-looked at that thing. I said, you know, this is very much anti-Arab. Popeye, the sailor man, eat the spinach and go sailing out around the world. And who was he going to get? Sinbad and the whole group of people. It was racist, representing one race after another, part of the colonial thing that came through, but it was reinstituting because it goes in the subliminal area. So like the brother was saying about the guns, the idea of shooting, continually shooting, and then that's what your child goes to sleep on, because they're too young to know how to decode or to what is bad and not. And so people live on a fantasy line. I remember in reference to trying to heal some men who had been rapists. I visited Avenel Prison. That was one of the prisons I went to give a lecture to talk. And I went down there. Nobody visits them because nobody wants to visit men that have raped some little kids or have done all kinds of stuff that they have done. And so, but they said in order to cure a person who's been a rapist like that, and in fact, when I got down there, I was so surprised, all those men. I said, what? All of these the handsomest men I ever saw look like these were down in that prison. I said, and they're rapists? I said, how? If a girl was walking down the street and she wanted to kind of like hug up to one of the men that she thought was safe because she saw an old bum coming along that she felt might molest her, but the one that looked like would have been the one to rape her was the one that she would have been hugging up against and running away from the wild one, so that they didn't look wild at all. And I went and I told my class, you know, I said, something is very puzzling. I can't believe that those men look so good and so appealing and nice. So she said, yes, those are the mama's boys. Mama's boys that never received proper discipline and understanding of what real love was, but dealt with manipulation. And those were some of the very ones. And so anyway, there was another program. They would say that if you have a hardened rapist, how do you teach? And they said to one of them, well, didn't you feel anything? You were raping this woman and you left her there with her insides, the little tender tissues, etc., all bloodied and ripped and torn. Didn't you feel anything for her? And so the guy said, no, I didn't feel anything. Just like picking up this paper, putting it down. I felt nothing. And you felt nothing. And